Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Ches Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very top line in the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Pei Ches Amid Aleph. Are in Siman Shin Mem in middle of Sif Aleph. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Beis Yisrael Hanusunim Batzaru Bashivya Ha'imdim Ben Bayam Ben Bayabasha Hamakim Yirachim Aleim VeYitziim Yitzaru Lirvacha Me'afelu La'ira Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagalo V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, Esther Fradel Bas Chana, Moshe Meir ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Chavadasa Bas Serel, Rivka Bas Shira Leah. They should all have a Refuah Shalema B'Seich Shar Chole Yisrael, and we are mispal that B'schus the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael, Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael B'chol Makom Shehem. So here in Siman Shin Mem, in Sif Aleph, the Mechaber told us a halacha that you're not allowed to remove hair from the body. And the Mechaber told us that you're not allowed to do this bein bayad, bein bekli. You're not allowed to pluck hair off of the body using your hands. You're not allowed to cut hair off the body using any kind of an implement. We saw in the Mishnah Berurah that there is a difference between doing it bayad and doing it bekli. If you do it biyad, it's an issa d'Rabbanan. Why is it an issa d'Rabbanan? Because that is considered to be shaloi kederech. That's not the derech of geizes. Remember, this is all based on the av malacha of geizes, literally shearing. When you shear the wool off of an animal, that's done with an implement. It's not done biyad. Therefore, to do it biyad would only be an issa d'Rabbanan. To do it with a keli would be an issa d'Araisa. Then the Mechaber told us that there is a shear to this malacha. How many hairs would you have to remove in order to be chayiv to bring a karban chatas? You would have to bring two. That's why the Mechaber wrote, v'chayiv al shtei sa'aros. However, we learned in the Mishnah Berurah that while it's true that in order to be chayiv to bring a karban chatas, you would have to remove two hairs, but it's still an issa d'Araisa to remove even one. And that's based on the rule of chatzi shear aser min HaTorah. Now we continue on the top line of Kuf Pei Ches Amud Aleph, continues the Mechaber, and the Mechaber says, Umalaket levanois mitoich shechoros. If somebody would go and pluck white hairs from amongst the black hairs, I could show you white hairs, but I can't really show you black hairs that much anymore. If somebody had a nice, what do they call it? Salt and pepper beard or his hair, and he wants to pluck out the white. He wants to look younger. So he plucks the white hairs from amongst the black hairs. Afilu ba'achas chayev, that would be an issa d'Araisa, even if you only pull out one. And we'll see why in the Mishnah Berurah. Continues the Mechaber, v'davar zeh, and the truth is that to do this, to pluck white hairs from amongst the black hairs, v'davar zeh afilu b'choil aser. The truth is that you're not allowed to do this even on a Tuesday. This is not only a problem in Hilchos Shabbos. You're never allowed to do this. Why? Mishum lo yilbash gever simlas isha. Because of the issa d'Araisa, based on the pasuk lo yilbash gever simlas isha, that a man should not wear the clothing of a woman. Literally, taken literally, what that pasuk seems to aser is only what I just said, that a man cannot put on the clothing of a woman. But we know from the Gemara in Nazir that this is not just an iser that goes on clothing. The iser Torah over here of lo yilbash gever simlas isha is that a man is not supposed to do things to his body, to beautify his body, which are things that are commonly done only by women. And this, the Mechaber is telling us, this was something that women did. Women would go ahead and pluck out the white hairs because they wanted to look young. This was not something that men did. So for a man to do this would run up against the Isser of Lo Yilbash Gever Simlas Isha. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Dalid. We did quite a bit of the Mishnah Berurah on this page already yesterday. We're up to Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Dalid. So the Mechaber said that if you pluck the white hairs out from amongst the white hairs, that is Aser on Shabbos. Even if you only do one, you don't need the shear of two. If you pluck one white hair from amongst the black hairs, you would already be chayiv to bring a carbon chatos if you did this b'shoigig, even though it's only one hair. Says the Mishnah Berurah, afilu ba'achas chayiv. Why is this? V'atam, the reason for this is mishum da afilu ba'achas makpid shelo yeh nira kezakin. Because over here, why is it that in order to be chayiv with carbon chatos you have to pluck 2 hairs? Because in order for the malacha to be considered a malacha chashuva, you have to do the malacha with a minimum shear. What's the minimum shear? The minimum shear is 2 hairs. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, when you're plucking a white hair from amongst the black hairs, that's a malacha chashuva even if you only remove 1 hair. Why? Because you're makpid on that 1 hair. So that gives the act great significance. Since you're makpid, you want that white hair gone. When you pluck that white hair, that's considered a malacha chashuva. And this is an important concept that we're going to see in today's share, we're going to see in tomorrow's share, that when there's a minimum shear for a malacha, that shear is not always dafka. The point of the minimum shear is, like I said, the act, the malacha, has to have significance. So there's a minimum shear in order to make it significant. But sometimes there's something significant about the act that you're doing, even if you do not do it with the minimum shear. This is a case in point. Usually you need 2 hairs, but when you remove a white hair from amongst black, you're makbid on that white hair. That gives the removal chashivas. That makes it a chashav a malacha, and that would bring on a chiyav chatos. Lakach chashiva malacha. Ubetosefta, the Tosefta tells us, Isa tehu adin b'malakit shchayros mitoich levanos. Sometimes this could also be true if you're plucking black hairs from amongst white hairs. I guess sometimes you don't like the way it looks. If it's white and there's only a few black ones and it looks funny, you might want to pluck the black ones. But again, the point is, if what you're doing as chashivas, because you're makbid on that hair, so then when you pluck it, that gives it chashivas, and then it would be a chiyav chatos even with 1. Moving along to Ais Cotton Hay. So the Mechaber told us that if you go ahead and you do this, you pluck white hairs from amongst black, you're also running up against the iser of lo yilbash gever simlas isha. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Why is this? Shederech hanoshim lahakbid al zeh lehisnois. Because this is something that women do. Women are very makbid on their looks, on their beauty, and therefore this was like a cosmetic procedure that they would go ahead and do. So now you're doing something that is considered simlas isha. It's the derech of noshim, it's not the derech of men, and it comes up against this iser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'ata now, nevar b'miktsas din maleches hageziza. It's interesting that the Mishnah Berurah didn't see fit to do this as a hakdama to the Siman, which we've seen many times before, that when the Mechaber is coming to discuss a particular malacha, the Mechaber will go ahead and give us a hakdama. Over here, he didn't give this to us as a hakdama, he's doing it at the end. So says the Chavetz Chaim on the topic of the malacha of goizes of shearing. Says the Chavetz Chaim, ha-goizes tzemer oy seyar, if somebody shears wool or hair, Bein min ha-behema, whether he's shearing it off a domesticated animal, bein min ha-chaya, or he's shearing it off of a non-domesticated animal, like a deer, chayiv, he would be chayiv. This would be an issa daraisa. V'kama shi'ura l'chiyav, how much would you have to shear in order to have this chiyav of a carbon chatos? Kedei litvais bimenu chut, you would have to shear off enough material so that you could spin a thread she'arkai karov la'arba tvachim. That's close to 4 tvachim long, which is be'erich 12 inches. So you're shearing wool off a sheep, you're shearing the hair off of another animal, off a chaya. How much do you have to remove in order to be chayiv a carbon chatos? If you did this b'shoigeg, you would have to remove enough that you could use it to spin a thread that's approximately 12 inches long, laha Rambam. That would be the shita of the Rambam, ula Rashi, but Rashi is more machmer, ula Rashi machtzis mizeh. According to Rashi, even less than that, even if it's 2 tvachim, so approximately 6 inches, would already be a chiyav chatos. Base, next entry of the Chavetz Chaim here on the topic of goizes. Ha-chiyav shel geziza, this is a daraisa of shearing, hu bein kishe goizes min hachai, This applies if you're shearing off a living animal, bein kishegoizes min ames, or if you're shearing off of a dead animal. And not only that, afilu min hashelach shelahein, even if you shear the material off of a dead animal's hide. So the malach of goizes says the Chavetz Chaim, is on a living animal, it's on a non-living animal, and it's even if you've already taken the hide off the animal, and now you've got a hide laying on the table, and you want to shear the hair or the wool off of the hide, that's also the Issa Daraisa of Goizes. What's a shelach, says the Chavetz Chaim in the brackets? Hainu ur, this is the hide, kishenivshat min behema, after it has been flayed off of the animal. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'dafka Goizes chiyuvai b'chol gavni. However, this Isser, when we're saying that the Isser applies, whether the animal is living, whether the animal is non-living, when we say that, that's only if you're doing goizes, if you're shearing, which means that you're using an implement. If you're doing it with a keli, then it applies equally to a living animal or a non-living animal. Aval toilesh min hachai, but if you pluck with your hand off of a living animal, potter. That would not be an Issa Daraisa, that would be Potter Avaloser, that would be an Issa Darabanan. Why would that be an Issa Darabanan? Says the Mishnah Berurah, De'ein derech litlosh, because this would be Goizes Shaloi Kedarkoi. It's not the derech to pluck wool or to pluck hair off of a living animal. Why? The Ka'avla, because you're going to hurt the animal. Ela Ligzois, the derech of Geziza on a living animal is to use a keli, because that doesn't hurt the animal. But if you're going to try to rip out the wool or the hair off the animal using your hand, that's going to hurt. Memelo, this is Goizeh Shaloi Kedarkai on a living animal, and therefore it would only be Nisa D'Rabbanan. Aval hatoilish biyad min hamesa, but if you use your hand to pluck wool or hair off of a non-living animal, derech litloish kamay ligzois, then it is Kedarkai. Because by a non-living animal, obviously you don't care if it's going to be painful, right? Not feeling anything. So by a living animal, toilish, plucking with your hand, it's shaloi kedarkai, it's a darabanan. But by a non-living animal, it's not shaloi kedarkai, and it's a daraisa v'chayev. Valkei. Now, based on this, very important halacha that a lot of people wouldn't guess. Valkei, therefore, Oisan b'nei Adam, those individuals, hamlubashin ba'oiros shel behema v'chaya, who wear the hides of domesticated animals or non-domesticated animals, aka fur. So somebody who has a mink is the hide of a chaya, right? A lot of fur, rabbit fur, right? It's the hide of a chaya. And it's got the fur. That's what you would normally shear off if you wanted to shear. So, people who are wearing furs, they have to be very careful that they do not pluck hair off of the fur on Shabbos, because to do so would be an Issa D'Oraisa. For this reason, the Sefer Hasidim says it's also to delouse a hide, because when you go to pluck lice off the hide, you may very easily come to pluck out hairs. Ayin Sham. But this only applies to a behema or a chaya. Aval ba'oifos, but by birds, darkon lahaser hanoitzos al yedei tlisha, kamoi bebehema al yedei geziza. By an animal, we have this distinction that to pluck off hair with your hand, if it's living, is considered shaloi kedarkoi, and therefore it's a derabanan. But by fowl, by birds, the Chavetz Chaim tells us not that way. He says by birds, it's the derech to pluck feathers. I guess even if the bird is alive. And therefore, if somebody plucks a feather off a bird, bein mechayim, whether it's living, bein la'achar misa, or after it's dead, chayiv, that would be an issa daraisa. The tlishasan, zuhi gizasan. Because plucking the feather, that is goizes by a bird. Very interesting. The shaila comes up over here. If you're eating a piece of chicken, and the chicken has feathers on it, are you allowed to pluck the feathers on Shabbos. The Rishiva Zatzal Rav Moshe Zecher Tzadik L'Vracha writes in the Igris that you are allowed to. And the reason he gives is because he says that the chicken that's on your plate is not a chicken. It's not looked upon as being a bird. It's looked upon as being food. And there's no Isser of Geizes on food. Ois Katan Gimel, not Ois Katan Gimel, entry Gimel in the Chavetz Chaim, says the Chavetz Chaim, HaTorah tzemer min hachai, if somebody spins wool from a living animal. So you go over to a sheep that's got a lot of wool on it, and you take the wool and you start spinning it into thread on the living animal. HaTorah tzemer min hachai, if somebody spins wool off a living animal, potter, he's potter bein min hatviyah. There's no Isser Daraisa either on Toiveh, which is spinning is an Av Malacha. You're not allowed to spin thread on Shabbos. But you'd be potter, which is potter Avalosser. It wouldn't be an Isser Daraisa, it would be an Isser Darabanan to spin thread from the wool that's attached to the animal. Bein min agziza. And if you end up pulling it off, it's not going to be an Isser Daraisa of Geizes, because we just said, pulling off a living animal is not an Isser Daraisa. She'ein derech tviyah u'geziza b'kach. And again, by geizes, we already explained that when you do it biyad, it's geizes shaloi kedarkai, and therefore it's only an Isser Darabanan. By toiveh, also spinning, it's toiveh shaloi kedarkai. You don't spin thread off of a living animal, it's shaloi kedarkai, and therefore it would only be an Isser Darabanan. We have a tiny bit left here in the Mechaber. It's a Ramah. Let's finish off the Sif. And I think we're going to go a little bit weiter after that because this is so short. We'll go a little bit weiter. Says the Ramah Hagah, V'ayin le'el seif Siman Shin Gimel din Srika v'chafifa. The Ramah sends us back to Siman Shin Gimel to take a look at the halachas that we discussed over there when it comes to combing hair, the chafifa, or rubbing hair, where we learned over there that you're not allowed to use a comb on Shabbos. You can't comb your hair on Shabbos because that we consider to be a psik resha, that it's going to remove hair. So you're not allowed to use a comb or a brush on Shabbos. They have what they call a Shabbos brush. If you have a brush with with bristles that are very, very spaced apart, and they're not very stiff bristles so that they bend, they're not going to rip out the hair, instead the bristles will bend, that's something that you could use. But in a general sense, we don't use combs or brushes on Shabbos. And the chafifa, we learned in the Ramah over there that you're allowed to go ahead and rub your hair. The Mishnah Berurah said also to separate the hair. If you do it in a gentle way so that it's not a psik resha that you're going to remove hair, that would be okay. All right, let's turn the page to Kuf Peches Amud Beis, and let's do a little bit of Kuf Peches Amud Beis. Says the Mechaber Sif Beis, Aser lachtarich yabeles migufay. You're not allowed to cut off a wart or a blister off of your body. Bein bayad, you're not allowed to do this with your hand. Bein bekli, you're not allowed to do it with an implement. Bein loi, you're not allowed to do it on your own body. Bein la'acher, you're not allowed to do it off of somebody else's body. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Vav, lachtoich. You're not allowed to cut this wart or blister off. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true. Afilu hi yevesha. Even if it's something that's already dried out. And since it's dried out, it is going to crumble and fall off the body on its own, and therefore it's not really considered attached to the body anymore. While the wart or the blister is moist and it's still growing, so then it's considered to be attached to the body. Once it's dried and dead and it's going to crumble and fall off, we don't see it as being attached to the body anymore. Yet, says the Mishnah Berurah, even that's aser. Even if it's dried out, so it's going to crumble. That's what lehisparech means. On its own, afilu hachi aser, it's still an Isser Darabanan to go ahead and cut it off or pull it off. V'chol zeh li'inyan isura, aval inyan chiyuva, but to be chayav a karbachatos, that it should be a daraisa, einay chayav el imke noitla kishi lecha. You would only be over a daraisa to have to be a karbachatos if it's moist, ubikli, and only if you do it with a keli, because that's considered kedarkoi. To do it with your hand is not considered kedarkoi. The azru b'chlal goizes, again, this is based on goizes. Ois katan zayin, yabelas migufay. V'huadin, the same halacha applies. The asur litloi sha'or tzitzin shel or. This is very important, Rabbi Isai. You're not allowed to remove any strips of skin off your body. Shepershu ktsas me'al gabe yodai. If you have some dry skin that is peeling off your hand, or very common on the lips. If somebody has dry lips, you're not allowed to go pull a piece of skin off. I'll speak about that more in a second. Let's just do ice ches. The Mechaber said you're not allowed to do this. Bein bayad, bein bekli. The Chavetz Chaim is moisif v'hu adin b'shinov. You're not allowed to use your teeth. So you're not allowed to bite skin off. You're not allowed to bite your nails off on Shabbos. Now, the Mishnah Berurah sent us back over here to Shin Chav Ches Sif Lamed Aleph. Over there we discussed nails that have become separated. So we said that the halach is if you have a fingernail that is peeling off on Shabbos, so if it's roiv, if it's separated roiv, and we discussed over there that roiv would mean roiv of the width of the nail. So going across the nail over here, if you have a strip of fingernail that is separated more than halfway across and it's causing pain, so you need two factors. One factor is it has to be separated more than halfway, so it has to be roiv separated. The other factor is it has to be causing pain. Then you're allowed to rip it off with your hand on Shabbos. You're not allowed to use a keli, but you're allowed to rip it off with your hand. You'd be allowed to bite it off with your teeth. Hangnails, that's a piece of skin on the side of the nail that is peeled back, you're not allowed to remove. The Mishnah Berurah said we should be machmir. If you remember, there's a machlokes rishonim. The lashon of the mechaber is that you're allowed to take it off if it's separated most of the way lamaila, going up. There's a machlokes Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, what lamaila means. The Ramah says we don't know what lamaila means, and therefore we have to be machmir. I think it was a Ramah. Was it a Ramah or was it the mechaber? Shin Chav Ches, Lamed Aleph. Shin Chav Ches, Lamed Aleph. Nope, it was the Mechaber himself. The Mechaber says you have this machlokes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. We don't know what's called Lamaila, and therefore the Mechaber said Tzarich Lachush L'Shnei Pirushim. We have to worry about both. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah over there, nice cotton tzadik test. V'lachein, therefore, afilu pirshu ruban. When it comes to a hangnail, that's not a nail, Rabbi Isai. A hangnail is the piece of skin alongside the nail. If you have such a piece of skin that's hanging, asur litlan, you're not allowed to remove it. Afilu biyad, even using your hand, because we don't know what's called roiv lamaila. So that you would not be allowed to remove. Okay. This might be a record. I think this might be the shortest share that I've ever recorded. But we're going to stop over here. Yes, Hashem will continue next time with Sif Gimel. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnasa, Sheduchim to all those in need. We should be Zoicha to the Bias Goyel Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.